What happens when ordinary people think they can intimidate someone, not knowing that a trained warrior is watching from the shadows? This is the true story of Sarah Martinez, a young waitress who faced her worst nightmare on what seemed like just another busy Friday night. But sometimes, guardian angels come in the most unexpected forms. The rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's Diner like impatient fingers, creating a steady rhythm that had become the soundtrack to Sarah Martinez's evening shift. At 23, she had been working at the small-town restaurant for almost 2 years, saving every penny she could to pay for her nursing school tuition. The diner sat on the edge of Millfield, a quiet town where everybody knew everybody, and trouble was usually limited to teenagers staying out past curfew or the occasional argument over a parking spot. Sarah wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that evening, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that had started to come loose during the dinner rush. The Friday night crowd was beginning to thin out, leaving behind the usual mix of coffee-stained tables, crumpled napkins, and the lingering smell of fried food that seemed to cling to everything in the place. "Sarah, you doing okay over there?" called out Mike, the cook, from behind the kitchen window. His graying beard was damp with sweat from working over the hot grill all evening. Mike had been at Murphy's for 15 years and had become something of a father figure to Sarah, always looking out for her during the late shifts. "I'm fine, Mike. Just tired," Sarah replied, managing a small smile. She had been pulling double shifts for the past month, trying to make ends meet. Her mother's medical bills were piling up, and every extra dollar counted. The tips had been decent that night, but not quite enough to cover what she needed. The bell above the front door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see 3 men walking in. They were dressed casually, but something about them immediately put her on edge. The tallest one, a man with bleached blonde hair and arms covered in tattoos, looked around the diner with a smirk that made Sarah's stomach turn. The other 2 followed behind him like shadows, one stocky with a shaved head, the other thin with nervous eyes that darted around constantly. They chose a booth in the corner, the one that was partially hidden from the kitchen window. Sarah grabbed her notepad and pen, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about these 3 felt different, dangerous. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I get you to drink?" Sarah asked, approaching their table with her best customer service smile. The blonde man looked her up and down slowly, making no effort to hide what he was doing. Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice carrying a tone that made Sarah want to step back. "You're a pretty little thing, aren't you?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger, but she kept her voice steady. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" "Oh, she's feisty too," the stocky man chimed in, laughing in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I like that in a woman." "3 beers, the blonde man said, still staring at Sarah in a way that made her feel exposed. "And take your time bringing them over. We want to enjoy the view." Sarah nodded quickly and hurried back to the counter, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled 3 bottles from the cooler. Mike noticed her distress immediately. "Those guys giving you trouble?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron and glancing toward the corner booth. "I can handle it," Sarah said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "They're just being inappropriate." Mike frowned and stepped closer to the kitchen window, getting a better look at the 3 men. "You know what? Why don't you let Tommy take that table? He can handle those types." Tommy was the other server on duty, a college kid who was built like a linebacker and wasn't easily intimidated. But Sarah shook her head. She couldn't afford to lose tables, especially not on a Friday night when tips were typically better. "No, it's okay. I need the money," she said, balancing the 3 beer bottles on a tray. "I'll just serve them quickly and stay professional." As Sarah approached the table again, she noticed that the 3 men had spread out more, taking up more space than necessary. The thin one had stretched his legs across the aisle, making it difficult for her to get close to the table without stepping over him. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely, waiting for him to move his legs. "Oh, you need to get by?" the thin man asked with fake innocence. "Well, you'll have to ask nicely." Sarah felt her face burning with humiliation, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Could you please move your legs so I can serve your drinks? How about you say pretty please?" the blonde man suggested, and all 3 of them burst into laughter. Sarah set the tray down on a nearby table and placed the beers in front of them without saying another word. She was turning to leave when the blonde man grabbed her wrist. "Hey, where are you going so fast?" he said, his grip tightening. "We haven't ordered food yet." Sarah tried to pull her arm free, but his hold was firm. "Please let go of me, sir. I'll come back to take your food order in a moment." "I don't think you understand," the stocky man said, sliding out of the booth and standing up. He was shorter than Sarah had expected, but his build was intimidating. "We're not just here for the food. We're here for the full service experience." The way he emphasized full service made Sarah's blood run cold. She looked around the diner desperately, but most of the other customers had left, and the few remaining were elderly couples who weren't paying attention to what was happening in the corner booth. "Let go of me," Sarah said more firmly, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Or what?" the blonde man asked, standing up as well. "What are you going to do about it, sweetheart?" That's when Sarah noticed the fourth customer she hadn't seen come in. He was sitting alone at the counter, his back to the scene unfolding in the corner. He was a large man with broad shoulders, wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans. His dark hair was cut short, and there was something about the way he held himself that suggested discipline and control. The man at the counter had been quietly eating his meal, occasionally glancing at his phone, but Sarah could see his reflection in the mirror behind the counter. His eyes were alert, watching everything that was happening. When the blonde man grabbed Sarah's wrist, she saw the stranger's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I said let go," Sarah repeated, her voice starting to shake, despite her efforts to remain calm. The thin man laughed and stood up as well, effectively boxing Sarah in. "You know what I think? I think you need to learn some manners. Maybe we should teach you how to properly serve customers." The stocky man reached out and grabbed Sarah's other arm, and she realized with growing panic that she was trapped between the three of them. The diner suddenly felt very quiet, the only sounds being the rain against the windows and the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. "Help!" Sarah called out, hoping Mike would hear her from the kitchen, but her voice came out weaker than she intended. "Nobody's going to help you, honey," the blonde man said, leaning closer to her face. "It's just you and us now, so why don't you make this easy on yourself and do what we ask?" Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She refused to let these men see her cry. She tried to think of what her self-defense instructor had taught her in the one class she had been able to afford, but her mind was blank with fear. That's when she heard the scrape of a chair being pushed back from the counter. The stranger stood up slowly, methodically, like someone who had done this many times before. He was even taller than Sarah had thought, easily 6'3", with the kind of build that came from years of serious physical training. There was something in the way he moved that made everyone in the diner, including the three men harassing Sarah, take notice. He turned around to face them, and Sarah saw his face for the first time. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow and another along his jawline, the kind of marks that told stories Sarah couldn't even imagine. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm and quiet, but carrying an authority that filled the entire diner. The blonde man looked the stranger up and down, clearly trying to decide if he represented a real threat. "Mind your own business, buddy. We're just having a conversation with the waitress." "Doesn't look like much of a conversation to me," the stranger replied, taking a step closer. "Looks like three grown men intimidating a young woman who's just trying to do her job." Sarah felt the grips on her arms loosen slightly as the three men turned their attention to this new threat. She used the opportunity to try to step back, but the thin man tightened his hold on her again. "I said mind your own business," the stocky man said, puffing out his chest in an attempt to look more intimidating. "Unless you want to join the party." The stranger's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, slowly curl into fists. There was something about the way he positioned himself, balanced and ready, that suggested he was no stranger to conflict. "Here's what's going to happen," the stranger said, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. "You're going to let the lady go, you're going to pay for your drinks, and you're going to leave, right now." The three men exchanged glances and Sarah could see them weighing their options. They clearly hadn't expected any resistance, and this stranger was not what they had bargained for. The blonde man tried to maintain his bravado. "And what if we don't? What are you going to do about it?" The stranger smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "You really don't want to find out." For a moment, the diner was completely silent except for the rain and the distant sound of Mike moving around in the kitchen, unaware of the drama unfolding in the dining room. Sarah could feel her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Then the stocky man made his move. The stocky man lunged forward with surprising speed, throwing a wild right hook aimed at the stranger's head. What happened next would be burned into Sarah's memory forever. The stranger didn't just dodge the punch, He moved with a fluid precision that seemed almost choreographed, stepping slightly to his left while simultaneously catching the attacker's wrist in an iron grip. In one smooth motion, the stranger twisted the stocky man's arm behind his back and drove him face first into the nearest table with a force that rattled the salt and pepper shakers. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. "That was a mistake," the stranger said quietly, maintaining his hold on the stunned attacker. The thin man, seeing his friend disabled so quickly, released Sarah's arm and pulled what looked like a switchblade from his pocket. The metallic click as the blade snapped open seemed unnaturally loud in the confines of the diner. "Get off him," the thin man shouted, waving the knife erratically. "I'll cut you, man. I swear I'll cut you." Sarah gasped and stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The situation had escalated from harassment to a life-or-death confrontation in a matter of seconds. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. The stranger glanced at the knife with what could only be described as professional interest. He didn't look afraid. If anything, he looked disappointed, as if the appearance of a weapon had somehow made things too easy. "Put the knife down," he said in the same calm voice he had been using all along. "You're only going to hurt yourself with that thing." The blond man, who had been frozen in shock watching his stocky friend get neutralized, suddenly found his voice again. "You have no idea who you're messing with, you psycho. We're connected. We've got friends who will hunt you down." The stranger released the stocky man, who collapsed to his knees groaning and clutching his shoulder. But rather than backing away, the stranger took a step closer to the one with the knife. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been in places where men with knives, guns, and bombs tried to kill me every single day for months at a time. Do you really think one scared kid with a switchblade is going to worry me?" There was something in the way he said it that made Sarah believe every word. This wasn't bravado or empty threats. This was a man stating simple facts about his life. The thin man's hand was shaking now, and Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening air. "I'll do it, man. I'll stab you. Don't make me do it." "You won't," the stranger replied with absolute certainty. "Because you're not a killer. You're just a punk who thought he could intimidate a young woman, and now you're in way over your head." Mike's voice suddenly boomed from the kitchen. "Sarah, everything okay out there?" "I heard some noise." The interruption seemed to break whatever spell had been holding everyone in place. The thin man's eyes darted toward the kitchen, clearly calculating whether he could escape before Mike emerged to see what was happening. "Tell him everything's fine," the blonde man hissed at Sarah. "Tell him or things are going to get a lot worse for you." But Sarah had found her voice again. The appearance of the stranger, the way he had handled the situation with such confidence and skill, had given her courage she didn't know she possessed. "Mike!" she called out, her voice stronger now. "Call the police. These men tried to assault me." "Mike, bad." "What?" Mike's voice carried a note of fury that Sarah had never heard before. She could hear him moving rapidly around the kitchen, probably looking for something to use as a weapon. The blond man cursed and moved toward Sarah again, but the stranger stepped between them so quickly it seemed like he had teleported. "That's far enough," the stranger said. And now there was steel in his voice that made Sarah shiver despite herself. The thin man was still holding the knife, but his resolve was clearly cracking. "Come on, guys. Let's just get out of here. This is getting too crazy." "We're not going anywhere," the blond man snapped. "This freak thinks he's some kind of hero, but he's just one man. There's 3 of us. Actually," the stranger said conversationally. "There's one of you standing, one on the ground, and one who's about to wet himself. So the math doesn't really work out in your favor." Mike burst through the kitchen doors carrying a large meat cleaver, his face red with anger. At 62, he wasn't the physical specimen he once was, but the fury in his eyes made him look dangerous nonetheless. "What the hell is going on out here?" Mike demanded, taking in the scene, the stocky man still on his knees, the thin man with the knife, the blond man facing off against the stranger, and Sarah pressed against the far wall. "These 3 tried to assault Sarah," the stranger explained, without taking his eyes off the threats in front of him. "I was just explaining to them why that was a bad idea." Mike's grip on the cleaver tightened. "Sarah, honey, are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay," Sarah managed to say, though her voice was still shaky. "This man helped me. I don't even know his name, but he saved me." "The name's Marcus," the stranger said. "Marcus Rodriguez." and I think it's time for these gentlemen to make their exit. The thin man was backing toward the door now, the knife still in his hand but pointed downward. Come on, let's just go. This isn't worth it. But the blonde man wasn't ready to give up. Sarah could see the wheels turning in his head, probably trying to figure out how to salvage his dominance and save face in front of his friends.
You think this is over? He said to Marcus.
You think you can just embarrass us and walk away? We'll be waiting for you in the parking lot. We'll follow you home. This doesn't end here. Marcus nodded thoughtfully as if considering the threat seriously. You know what? You're right. This doesn't end here. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal something that made all three men go pale. Sarah couldn't see what it was from her angle, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. My name is Marcus Rodriguez, he repeated. Former Navy SEAL, currently working private security. I've done 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I've been shot at by professionals, blown up by experts, and hunted by people who make your worst nightmares look like bedtime stories. He closed the wallet and put it back in his pocket, but kept talking in that same calm, measured tone. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door right now. You're going to get in whatever piece of trash car you drove here, and you're going to drive away. If I ever see you again, if you ever come near this diner again, if you ever even think about bothering Sarah or anyone else like her, I will find you. The stocky man was struggling to his feet now, still holding his shoulder and wincing with every movement. His face was pale and sweaty, and Sarah could see that whatever Marcus had done to him had caused serious pain. You can't threaten us like that, the blonde man said. But his voice had lost most of its earlier bravado. There are laws against that kind of thing. Marcus smiled again, and this time there was genuine amusement in his expression. You're absolutely right. There are laws. The same laws that prohibit assault, battery, sexual harassment, and threatening people with deadly weapons. Should we call the police and sort this all out together? I'm sure they'd love to hear everyone's side of the story. The thin man had reached the door now and was fumbling with the handle. Guys, we need to leave. Now. Mike stepped forward, still holding the cleaver. I've already called the cops, he lied smoothly. They should be here any minute. As if on cue, the distant sound of sirens could be heard approaching. Sarah wasn't sure if Mike had actually called them, or if it was just coincidental, but the effect on the 3 men was immediate. This isn't over, the blonde man said. But he was already moving toward the door. You hear me? This isn't over. Yes, it is, Marcus replied calmly, unless you want it to be. And trust me, you don't want it to be. The 3 men stumbled out into the rain, the thin man helping to support the stocky one, who was still clearly in pain. Sarah watched through the window as they climbed into a beat-up pickup truck and drove away, tires squealing on the wet pavement. For a long moment, nobody said anything. The diner was quiet again, except for the rain and the sound of everyone trying to catch their breath. Mike was the first to speak. Sarah, honey, are you sure you're okay? Did they hurt you? Sarah shook her head, but she could feel her legs starting to shake as the adrenaline began to wear off. I'm okay. They grabbed my arms, but they didn't really hurt me. Not physically, anyway. Marcus had moved to the window and was watching the parking lot, apparently making sure the 3 men were really gone. They won't be back, he said with confidence. Bullies like that are all about easy targets. Once they realize someone's willing to fight back, they move on to softer prey. Sarah walked over to him on unsteady legs. I don't know how to thank you. I was so scared of what they might do. Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time she could see past the warrior facade to the man underneath. His eyes were kind, concerned, and surprisingly gentle.
You don't need to thank me, he said. Any decent person would have done the same thing.
No, Sarah said firmly. Any decent person would have called the police or tried to get help. You stood up to 3 men, one of them with a knife, to protect someone you don't even know. That's not something just anyone would do. Mike had put down the cleaver and was checking the locks on the front door. She's right, son. What you did took real courage. And skill, from what I could see. Where did you learn to fight like that? Marcus seemed uncomfortable with the attention and praise. Military training. You learn to handle yourself in difficult situations. Navy SEAL, Sarah said, remembering what he had told his attackers. That's like the elite of the elite, right? Marcus shrugged. It's a job. Sometimes a dangerous job, but still just a job. The sirens were getting closer now, and Marcus glanced toward the window again. Actually, someone did call the police. They'll probably want statements from all of us. Sarah felt a flutter of panic. Will I have to testify against those men? Will they come after me for revenge? Not if I can help it, Marcus said, his voice taking on that hard edge again. And I gave them enough information about who I am that they'll think twice before trying anything stupid. Mike was nodding approvingly. Smart thinking. Bullies only understand strength. You showed them they picked the wrong target. 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their red and blue lights painting the inside of the diner in alternating colors. Sarah watched as 4 officers got out and approached the front door. Here we go, Marcus said quietly. Just tell them exactly what happened. Don't embellish. Don't leave anything out. The truth is always the best defense. As the police officers entered the diner, Sarah realized that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. She had been saved by a stranger who turned out to be exactly the kind of hero she had read about in books, but never expected to meet in real life. But more than that, she had found her own courage in the process. When it mattered most, when Marcus had given her the chance to speak up, she had found her voice and called for help instead of staying silent out of fear. The questioning would be thorough, she knew. There would be paperwork, possibly a court case if the men were caught, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt truly safe. And it was all because of a stranger named Marcus Rodriguez who had decided that some things were worth fighting for. Officer Patricia Walsh was a 15-year veteran of the Northfield Police Department, and she had seen enough domestic disputes, bar fights and petty crimes to recognize the real thing when she walked into Murphy's Diner that rainy Friday night. The scene she found was unusual, to say the least. A young waitress sat at a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. An older man in a grease-stained apron hovered nearby like a protective father, and a large man in civilian clothes stood by the window, alert and watchful despite the apparent calm. I'm Officer Walsh, she announced to the room. I understand there was an incident here tonight? Over the next 2 hours, the 3 witnesses gave their statements. Sarah's account was detailed and emotional, interrupted occasionally by tears as she relived the fear and helplessness she had felt. Mike corroborated her story from his limited perspective in the kitchen, expressing anger at himself for not noticing the situation sooner. But it was Marcus's statement that really caught Officer Walsh's attention. His account was precise, methodical, and delivered with the kind of calm professionalism that spoke of someone who had given many such reports before. The 3 subjects entered the establishment at approximately 9:30 p.m., Marcus told her, referring to a small notebook he had been writing in while waiting for the police to arrive. They immediately began making inappropriate comments toward the victim, escalating to physical contact without consent. When I intervened verbally, they became aggressive. The subject, identified as stocky build, initiated physical contact by throwing a punch. I neutralized the threat using minimal necessary force. Officer Walsh looked up from her notes. Minimal necessary force? I used a basic arm control technique to subdue him without causing permanent injury, Marcus explained. The goal was to stop the threat, not to cause harm. Mr. Rodriguez, Officer Walsh said, studying the military ID he had provided, your record shows multiple commendations for valor. What brings a Navy SEAL to our little town? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah found herself leaning forward to hear his answer. She had been wondering the same thing. I'm on leave, he said finally. Medical leave. I was passing through town and stopped for dinner. Officer Walsh nodded and made a note. The subjects fled the scene before we arrived. Can you provide descriptions? Both Sarah and Marcus provided detailed descriptions of the 3 men, including the license plate number that Marcus had memorized as they drove away. Officer Walsh assured them that patrols would be watching for the vehicle and that all 3 men would be charged with assault, sexual harassment, and weapons violations once they were apprehended. What about protection for Sarah? Mike asked. What if they come back looking for revenge? We'll increase patrols around the diner for the next few weeks, Officer Walsh promised. But, honestly, given what happened here tonight, I doubt they'll be back. Men like that are cowards at heart. Marcus spoke up. I'll be staying in town for a few more days. I can keep an eye on things if needed. You don't have to do that. You've already done so much. I want to, Marcus said simply. It's the right thing to do. After the police left, Mike insisted on closing the diner early and driving Sarah home himself. Marcus offered to follow them, just to be safe. And Sarah found herself grateful for the extra protection even though logic told her the danger had passed. Sarah's small apartment was on the 2nd floor of an old Victorian house that had been converted into rental units. As Mike's car pulled up to the curb, Marcus parked behind them and got out to scan the area with the same watchful intensity he had shown at the diner. All clear, he told them, and Sarah realized he was serious about security in a way that most people couldn't even imagine. "Thank you," she said again as they reached her door. "Both of you. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't think about it," Mike said firmly, giving her a paternal hug. "It's over now. You're safe." Marcus handed her a business card. "This has my phone number. If anything happens, anything at all, that makes you uncomfortable, you call me immediately. Day or night." Sarah looked at the card. It was simple, professional, with just his name and a phone number. No fancy graphics or titles, just the basics. Somehow, that made it more reassuring rather than less. "I will," she promised. The next morning, Sarah woke to find that word of the incident had already spread through Millfield's tight-knit community. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop brought by a bouquet to brighten your spirits, and Tom from the hardware store stopped by to check if her locks were secure. By noon, half the town had heard some version of the story. Sarah walked to the diner for her Saturday shift with mixed feelings. Part of her wanted to call in sick, to hide at home and pretend the whole thing had never happened. But another part of her, the part that had found its voice when Marcus had given her the courage to stand up, knew that hiding wasn't the answer. Mike greeted her with relief in a bear hug. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" "Better than I expected," Sarah admitted. "Still a little shaky, but okay." "That's normal," said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Marcus sitting at the same counter stool he had occupied the night before, a cup of coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "You came back," she said, surprised by how happy that made her feel. "I told you I'd keep an eye on things," Marcus replied. "Besides, Mike makes excellent coffee." Mike beamed with pride. "Family recipe. Well, it's Maxwell House with a dash of cinnamon, but don't tell anyone." As Sarah went about her morning routine, she found herself stealing glances at Marcus. In the bright daylight streaming through the diner's windows, he looked less intimidating than he had during the confrontation. He was reading a paperback novel, something by Tom Clancy, and occasionally making notes in the margins. During her break, Sarah approached him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Last night you mentioned you're on medical leave. Are you okay? I mean, you seem pretty capable of handling yourself." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. Then he rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a network of surgical scars running from his wrist to his elbow. "IED," he said simply. "Improvised explosive device. Shattered the bones in my arm and did some nerve damage. I've had 3 surgeries and I'll probably need at least 2 more. Sarah stared at the scars, trying to imagine the pain and trauma behind them. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "It's okay," Marcus said, rolling his sleeve back down. "I'm dealing with it. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, the whole 9 yards. My therapist suggested I take some time to figure out what I want to do next, so I've been driving around the country, seeing places I never had time to visit before, and you ended up in Millfield. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned to visit." Over the next few days, Marcus became a regular at Murphy's Diner. He would arrive around lunchtime, order something simple, and spend hours reading or working on a laptop computer. Sarah learned that he was writing a memoir about his military experiences, though he was reluctant to discuss the details. "It's therapy," he explained when she asked. "My counselor says writing about traumatic experiences can help process them. I'm not sure I believe her, but it gives me something to do with my hands besides physical therapy exercises." Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations. Marcus was unlike anyone she had ever met, worldly and experienced, but also surprisingly gentle and thoughtful. He asked about her nursing school plans and seemed genuinely interested in her dreams of helping people. "You'd make a good nurse," he told her one afternoon. "You have the right instincts for taking care of people." "How would you know?" Sarah asked, laughing. "I've been in a lot of hospitals," Marcus said seriously. "I know the difference between someone who's just doing a job and someone who actually cares about their patients. You're definitely the second type." On Wednesday afternoon, Officer Walsh stopped by the diner with news. The 3 men from Friday night had been arrested in the next county over, caught in the act of harassing another young woman at a truck stop diner. They were being held on multiple charges, including the assault at Murphy's. "The good news is, they'll be locked up for a while," Officer Walsh told Sarah and Marcus. "The bad news is, the victim from last night was too scared to press charges, So most of their punishment will come from what happened here. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for the other woman, understanding completely why she might be too frightened to go through with a prosecution. But she also knew what Marcus would say before he said it. "I'm not backing down," Sarah announced. "If testifying against them helps protect other women from going through what I went through, then that's what I'll do." Marcus smiled at her, and Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at his approval. "That's very brave of you," Officer Walsh said. "The prosecutor will be in touch soon to prepare you for what to expect." After the officer left, Marcus was unusually quiet. Sarah noticed him staring out the window with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "My time here is almost up," he said. "I need to get back to California for my next round of medical appointments. But I'm proud of you for deciding to testify. That takes real courage." Sarah felt a stab of disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. She had grown accustomed to Marcus's presence in the diner, the sense of safety and security he provided just by being there. "Will you come back?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Marcus smiled. "Millfield has grown on me, and I'd like to see how your story turns out. My story, the nursing school, the trial, all of it. I have a feeling you're going to do great things with your life, Sarah Martinez." On Marcus's last day in town, Mike closed the diner early and the three of them sat around sharing stories and coffee. Marcus told them about some of his less classified military adventures. Mike shared tales from his decades in the restaurant business, and Sarah talked about her dreams of working in pediatric nursing. "Yo," Marcus said as the evening wound down. "What happened here last Friday wasn't just about three thugs getting put in their place. It was about people looking out for each other, standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous." "You did all the standing up," Sarah pointed out. "No," Marcus said firmly. "I just started it. You finished it by refusing to be intimidated, by calling for help when you had the chance, and by deciding to testify even though it would be easier to just let it go. Mike finished it by being willing to fight to protect you with a meat cleaver if necessary." Mike chuckled. "That was probably the most excitement this old place has seen in 20 years. I hope it's the most it sees for another 20 years, Sarah said. Marcus pulled out a different business card than the one he had given her before. This one had an address on it, as well as the phone number. "This is my permanent address in San Diego," he said. "I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay with you. Both of you." Sarah took the card, noting that his apartment was only about 2 hours from the nursing school she hoped to attend. "I'd like that," she said. 3 months later, Sarah testified against her attackers in a packed courtroom. All 3 men were sentenced to significant jail time, and the judge commended Sarah for her courage in coming forward. Marcus flew in from California to provide moral support, sitting in the gallery wearing his military dress uniform. That evening, at Murphy's Diner, they celebrated with Mike and several other townspeople who had become invested in Sarah's story. The local newspaper ran an article about the case with the headline, "Local Waitress Shows Courage in Face of Adversity." But Sarah knew the real headline should have been different. It should have read, "Community comes together when it matters most," or maybe "Heroes come in unexpected forms." 6 months after that night, Sarah received her acceptance letter to nursing school. She called Marcus immediately, barely able to contain her excitement. "I got in," she practically shouted into the phone. "I got into the program." "That's fantastic." Marcus's voice carried genuine joy and pride. "I knew you would. The scholarships and financial aid came through too. Between that and my savings, I can actually afford it. I'm going to be a nurse, Marcus. I'm really going to do it." "You were always going to do it," Marcus said. "You just needed to believe in yourself." A year later, Sarah was deep into her studies when she got another call from Marcus. He was getting married to a fellow veteran he had met in physical therapy, an army medic named Lisa, who understood both his strengths and his struggles. "I want you to be at the wedding," Marcus told her. "You and Mike both. You're family now." At the wedding, held in a small church overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Sarah watched Marcus exchange vows with Lisa and thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. A chance encounter, a moment of crisis, and suddenly, lives were intertwined in ways that none of them could have predicted. In her maid of honor speech, Lisa talked about how Marcus had told her about a night in a small-town diner when he had discovered that being a hero wasn't about the battles you fought in foreign countries, but about the stands you took for people who needed someone in their corner. "That night changed all of us," Lisa said, looking directly at Sarah. It reminded Marcus that his mission wasn't over just because he was out of the military. It reminded Sarah that she was stronger than she knew. and it reminded all of us that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage, compassion, and the willingness to do what's right, even when it's difficult. After the ceremony, as guests mingled on the beach, Sarah found herself standing with Marcus and Mike, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sarah asked. "All the time," Marcus admitted. "It was a turning point for me. I was struggling with who I was supposed to be if I wasn't a soldier anymore. That night reminded me that I'm still the same person, just fighting different battles. Funny how life works. You think you're just serving coffee and eggs, and suddenly you're part of something bigger." "We all were," Sarah said. "We all played a part in something important." As they stood there, three people whose lives had intersected in the most unexpected way, Sarah realized that the real lesson of that frightening Friday night wasn't about violence or revenge, or even justice. It was about the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they choose to care about each other. Marcus had shown her that heroes weren't mythical figures from movies and books, they were real people who made the choice to act when action was needed. Mike had shown her that family isn't always about blood relations. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to stand by you when things get difficult. And maybe, Sarah thought as she watched the waves roll onto the shore, she had shown them something too. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do the right thing despite that fear. The story that had begun with three men trying to intimidate a young waitress had become something much larger. A story about community, courage, and the unexpected ways that people can change each other's lives simply by being willing to care. Years later, when Sarah was working as a pediatric nurse and telling her young patients stories to help them be brave during difficult procedures, she would often think back to that night at Murphy's Diner. She would remember the fear, yes, but more importantly, she would remember the moment when a stranger named Marcus Rodriguez had stepped forward and reminded her that she didn't have to face her fears alone. And in those moments, surrounded by children who needed someone to show them what courage looked like, Sarah would understand that the circle of heroism that had begun that rainy Friday night was still growing, still spreading, still inspiring new acts of bravery and compassion wherever people chose to care enough to act. The legacy of that night lived on, not just in the three people who had been directly involved, but in every life they touched afterward, every person they inspired to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to stand up for those who needed someone in their corner. That, Sarah realized, was the true power of heroism. It wasn't about the moment of crisis itself, but about all the moments that came after, when the people who had been changed by that crisis went out into the world and changed others in turn. The story never really ended. It just kept growing, one act of courage at a time.